loss last week of 3 South African Navy sailors in a submarine accident that occurred off the Western Cape is a consequence of neglect from the government of South Africa. Decades of underfunding of the South African military has led to a dearth of qualified, experienced professionals within the military. While there are some small pockets of excellence that remain in the South African military, by and large, it's a force that's declining and degrading on a daily basis. The situation is quite acute, and it was highly predictable. And of course, I predicted this in my previous profession. But the point here is that this is a mess that the government has created. South Africa's government spends less than 1% of gross domestic product on its national defense, yet it expects the South African National Defense Force to participate in peacekeeping in Cote d'Ivoire, in Eritrea, in the Congo, everywhere you turn around. Burundi, they keep sending peacekeepers out and weakening the force because they're not getting the training they need back home, and the funding goes to take care of those deployments instead of taking care of equipment that needs to be maintained and training that must be pursued, as well as leadership training and experience for professionals. And this is the consequence of it. You see people dying at sea because of bad decisions made by poorly trained leaders as a consequence of underfunding. So who's to blame? Is it Jan van Riebeck? Is it Hendrik Verwoerd? Is it apartheid? No, it's the ruling government. The government of the day, of course, is the African National Congress, whose crooked 1999 arms deal to get payouts forced the military into purchasing equipment they simply did not need. The South African Army, as I've said repeatedly, did not get addressed in the 1999 arms deal. The Air Force and the Navy were addressed. Why wasn't the Army addressed? Why weren't there new prime movers purchased, new trucks, new light armored vehicles, updates to weapon systems, barracks improvements, training center improvements, money used to spend to train leaders? Because it's the Army that was given the mission for the peacekeeping, not the Air Force, not the Navy. Now, having said that, because of the high level of HIV infection within the South African infantry regiments or battalions, we have had a number of times when there have been members of the Navy and of the Air Force who've had to be part of a composite force that deployed, lacking esprit, lacking teamwork, or experience working together. But nonetheless, South Africa has managed to do that. The issue here is the neglect of the military, and it's showing up. This submarine never should have been doing these drills off the coast in this weather. And we had massive reports and open source reporting of people being washed away on beaches in the area, and lots of flooding taking place and heavy swells taking place. Yet the South African Navy put a submarine off the coast and is getting supplies from a helicopter in the middle of a storm swell. Whose judgment is making sense here? Certainly not the people on that submarine. So what happens next? Well, clearly we know what will happen next. We'll see folks like the economic freedom fighters and even members of the ruling African National Congress who are responsible for this debacle blame someone else. Probably blame it on military members whose pigmentation doesn't satisfy their desires for race hustling. Or they'll just shift the blame. Of course, the bottom line with this is that this has been going on for over 2 decades, this neglect of the military and underspending. 0.72% of GDP spent on national defense. That's a joke. That's even worse than Germany, who neglected their national defense, riding high off the hog on the skirts of the United States military, protecting them. Well, that's until Trump came along and threatened them. Anyway, but South Africa's military, what they spend on is an absolute joke. How the military leaders manage to even keep a force together, given the low level of funding and the frustrations they deal with, is shocking to say the least. There needs to be a serious inquiry here, not a Lady R investigation, a cover-up, nothing like that, but an actual investigation here. And someone needs to be held accountable. And the people who need to be held accountable are in the Navy, who made these poor decisions. And beyond that, the politicians who caused this situation to exist. They are the proximate cause of this. They are the reason why this sort of thing happens. It's so sad. Having talked to sailors in Cape Town, who told me that most people in the military that he knows and others that I talk to know are only there because they need a paycheck. It's sad. It's sad. Service to nation should be about patriotism, about contributing to society and giving back, not simply a paycheck. Of course, everyone deserves to be compensated. I mean, I couldn't have survived without a paycheck while I was in uniform. But it's about Constitution, in my case. It's about the American people. It's about peace and security around the world. That's why I served in uniform. It wasn't for the paycheck. I passed up a lot of big paychecks to stay in uniform. But in South Africa, it's a jobs program for the elites to dampen down the unemployment. It has virtually no impact. This is a really sad situation, folks. Really, really sad situation. And we'll see more things like this. I'm surprised we haven't seen more helicopter and aircraft crashes and mishaps as a consequence of poor funding. The South African military cannot even get the equipment that it purchased in the '99 arms deal in the air or at sea. Virtually every Type 209 submarine and every cruiser/frigate and every one of the Gripen multi-purpose fighters, interceptors, are no longer operational after just 2 decades. And they weren't even delivered 2 decades ago. They were only delivered about 15 years ago. This is the pathetic state of condition of the South African military, a consequence of neglect, poor leadership, and bad decision-making. The answer is to fix it. How do you fix it? Well, I'll tell you how you fix it. The way that you fix this is you adequately fund the military. They should be spending 2% of GDP on the military, but South Africa can't afford 2%. But certainly a boost up to 1% would make a difference here. Instead of the endless kleptocracy of stealing resources from taxpayers to enrich cadres within the African National Congress, they should be spending money to improve the state of their defense force. Also relieve the operational pressure. Stop signing up for peacekeeping missions that you don't have the resources to actually support. This will make a difference. Those resources can then be used to go into training and to teach leaders and to get leaders experience to prevent stupid situations like this from happening in the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force. So you need to increase funding, which is a very difficult thing to do, but a modest amount could have a big impact. Beyond that, the idiotic quotas that the military has need to disappear. People should be promoted within the military, within the police, within the fire services, within the prison services based on merit and competence and leadership potential to the next level, not based on patronage or skin pigmentation. And that works both ways. What South Africa needs is a merit-based society. What South Africa has is a patronage-based society. What South Africa needs is a merit-based military. What South Africa has is an underfunded, wholly neglected, patronage-based military. And that needs to stop going forward. Or we'll see more incidents like this. We're lucky we haven't seen these things sink. And there you go, folks, from Aix-les-Bains in the French Alps, the Riviera of the Alps. There's my take.